You're watching Zen-Brain. From March 2020, ever since the pandemic began, things haven't quite been the same for any of us. While the first lockdown got us all unawares, it brought with it deep anxiety, especially amongst those living alone and, of course, the elderly. For many, there was no help and acute loneliness. As many people began working from home, the fear of getting COVID loomed large, along with an uncertain future. The lockdown continued longer than expected. And while for some people it was just the break they needed, a time to reset and rejuvenate, for many the period was the worst they've ever had to face. Many companies and small businesses cut salaries and let go of their employees. Money dried up for many, and hundreds of thousands of people ended up spending their savings on hospital care. The number of calls to suicide helplines increased fivefold, if not more. People needed help. Some turned to friends for support, some to psychologists and psychiatrists. Depression was suddenly a commonly used word. And just when things began to look up, with a vaccine in sight, there came a second wave of the pandemic, stronger and more lethal. In Delhi, I don't know of a single family unaffected by this second wave. Every household suffered its own set of traumas. Either the entire family fell ill at the same time, like ours, or you lost a loved one or lost several members at the same time. It was heart-wrenching, seeing images and videos of people in their desperate search for hospital beds and oxygen cylinders, many losing the battle of their lives right in front of our eyes. And while many of us have been lucky to have overcome COVID, there are many out there who continue to bear the consequences of long COVID. Many find themselves constantly ill. Some have dizziness 24/7. Many elderly people were disoriented and continue suffering from brain fog. The list of ailments is endless. More than the physical impact of COVID, I think, it's the mental and emotional impact, the scars of which refuse to go in a hurry. Prolonged lockdowns have led to collective anxiety. That's why today we needed to talk about anxiety around the pandemic. Different forms of anxiety have resurfaced. The anxiety of being infected, of dying, financial anxiety, of course, anxiety among those living alone, anxiety of watching loved ones suffer, anxiety related to the new Delta Plus variant that is here as we fear the worst, a possible third wave. The important question to really ask is, how do we get out of this anxiety cycle? The one that comes from overthinking or repeated negative thoughts that something bad is going to happen. Joining me now is clinical psychologist and author Dr. Vandita Dubey. She's a familiar face on Zen-Brain. Thank you very much, Doc, for joining me all the way from the hills of Uttarakhand.
Thank you, Shruti. My pleasure to be here.
So, Doc, let me get straight to it. In the context of the pandemic, how do I know I'm suffering from anxiety? What does it feel like? And how is it different from, say, fear, worry, or stress?
Fear, worry, stress are all words that kind of are used as synonyms. Often, in common language, we just use them to describe the same human experience, really. Stress is a part of life. Anxiety is a part of life. At some point or the other, you do worry about something, right? Definitely, anxiety becomes a problem when it starts interfering with daily life. So if either you start avoiding things that you need to do, procrastinate, or you just simply avoid. You're avoiding to go out, or you're scared to be by yourself, and you need somebody constantly, and therefore you curtail your activities because of that. In any way, if it starts affecting life, whatever you do on a daily basis, your work, personal life, whatever it is, then it's obviously at a level where it needs to be addressed. Something needs to be done.
Doc, you talked about some people avoiding going out, and I think that is something that is, a lot of us are facing, right? There's social anxiety. I know of a lot of elderly people who are just very scared to get out of the house. How do you tackle that anxiety?
The virus is there. It's real. So the situation is real. So it's not, it's not entirely in our heads. Assuming that it's safe enough to step out, assuming that you've got your shots, assuming that you're going to wear your mask and, you're not going to a very crowded place, then, it's really about looking at your fears and really figuring out what it is that you're worrying about and evaluating them, looking at them, saying, how real are they? How likely is anything to happen? And can you do anything to prevent if falling sick is the fear really? I think a lot of times it's just that whole thing of, we all tend to get into this mode of inertia. And because of the pandemic, the home is a safer place than outside. And I mean, it's kind of, for a lot of people, it's always been a safer place, but now it's even more so. It's been amplified, the whole thing. And so just breaking that inertia, breaking that habit is itself difficult. That's what keeps people from stepping out. So one can start small. The way to really break a habit, any kind of a habit for that matter, is that you start working on it slowly, and it's a step-by-step process. So, make short trips. So in fact, I was speaking with somebody recently, and I was telling her, okay, leave your phone in the house and just go up to the gate of your house. Then maybe the next day you can step out of the gate and go. The third day maybe you can go to the shop closest, and so on, so that you also get a little more familiar, a little more accustomed to kind of doing things on your own and outside the house.
Glad you brought up this whole concept of inertia, because I think all of us have faced that. It's not something that we have expressed even to ourselves, but there is some sort of subconscious fear of getting out so that you don't get the infection back in, especially when you have elderly people in the house. I want to talk about people living alone who face this cycle of anxiety because they are alone, because they have nobody else that could be there if they fell ill. What should somebody like that do? When is it time to worry?
Worry about worry? Or
both. Worry about worry. Worry about the fact that they are alone.
When we talk about something like anxiety or something about worry, there are two aspects to it. One is the aspect which is based in reality, and then it's a problem that needs to be solved. And the other aspect of it is what we're imagining or what we're anticipating. So it's about, sitting down and thinking about, okay, what part of it is a problem that can be addressed to some extent or solved to some extent. So if you are living alone, and you're worried about what happens if you fall sick, which is could be a real situation, something to think about or plan for, then it's about planning for it, right? So thinking about who could be your backup, who can you call, whose number can you save as, the emergency numbers. We were at one point, we would save that emergency, the ICE. So who is that person, setting up some backups. The other part of it is what goes on in our head in terms of anticipation. You're imagining scenarios, you're imagining, and the imagination goes to the worst case. If nothing else, there's a 50-50 chance of anything happening or not happening, right? So, but when we're in that frame of mind, we're only thinking of the negative. We're only thinking of the 50% chance that the worst may happen, and we're amplifying it, right? We're ignoring the 50% chance that it may not happen. So it's just about looking at one's thinking and saying, okay, how much of it is really what I'm just anticipating at this point, just imagining in a way. You could call them thinking errors or faulty thoughts or cognitive errors, as we call them. And these are, these are real. These are, all of us engage in them from time to time.
But Doc, one aspect is thinking about anxiety or feeling anxious. How do we know that it's, anxiety has gotten the best of us or has affected us physically?
Most of us can identify that feeling, that kind of knot in the stomach, or that heavy feeling in the chest, or the muscles tensing up. These are all physical manifestations of stress or of anxiety. So that's kind of what's physically going on in your body when you are experiencing anxiety. That's part of the stress response, right, of the body. So paying attention to one's own body, it'll tell you when you're not feeling comfortable, right? And that's the beginning of it. And for some people, these beginning symptoms can over time turn into things like stomach distress, or having to go to the loo often, or it could be headaches, it could be aches and pains elsewhere, it could be acidity, it can take multiple health forms, including over a long period of time, things like hypertension, and can worsen diabetes, or can worsen certain health conditions as well.
And sleep, it does affect sleep.
And sleep.
Yeah. So when is it time to seek help?
Okay, so one more thing. That's a good point that you brought up. You were earlier asking, when do we know that it's time to seek help? So it is time to seek help when physical parameters, like you said, sleep, If your sleep is disrupted, and once or twice is okay. I mean, everybody's sleep is disrupted once or twice. But if it is, it is consistent, it's been a while that you haven't been able to either fall asleep, or you get up in the middle of the night and then your mind gets caught in these worries and you can't fall back asleep. So sleep issues, definitely. If you're feeling really anxious, you may lose your appetite. So if you're not being able to eat properly, if you actually start losing weight. On the other hand, sometimes people start gaining weight, but with anxiety, typically, I mean, that's more of a depression thing, that you can lose weight or you can gain weight. In anxiety, oftentimes what we see is weight loss over a period of time, if that's happening. So these are physical signs. And again, like I said, aches or pains, you've gone to the doctor, they haven't been able to figure out anything that's physically wrong, yet you have whatever discomforts you have in your body, then that's probably, stress is most likely contributing, if not causing it. If you're avoiding things, in terms of our behavior, if there's a change. So if there are work things that you're avoiding, or deadlines that you're not being able to meet, or you're avoiding meeting people, socially, you don't want to talk to people, you're not calling them up, you're not meeting, you're avoiding. Or, I mean, it can be various kinds of things, or it could be fears or phobias of different things. If you're not getting your vaccination because you're scared of needles, for example, or of getting a shot, or, some people are scared of just the sight of blood, it makes them very scared. So if that is what's getting in the way, so if these kinds of phobias, or it can be a phobia of anything, it could be even a phobia of dogs or whatever, if that's really getting amplified, people have what we call intrusive thoughts, where they'll have these scary images, scary impulses which are strange to them. And these impulses could be of harming themselves, or it could be something which is considered inappropriate. So it could be sexual thoughts. So, but these are just thoughts. It's not that they're meaning to do any of these things. They don't intend to do them. But it's like these just uncomfortable and scary thoughts just pop up. Or sometimes, even what a lot of us can recognize as obsessive compulsive behavior. So you're being very compulsive about, switching lights on and off, or the door has to be shut a certain way, or certain prayers have to be done in a certain way, or whatever. Just being very, having obsessive thoughts or very compulsive behavior around different things. Any of these are all different manifestations of anxiety in grown-ups. In kids, it is a little different. It appears more as aches and pains. So if a child is complaining of stomach aches, for example, a lot, or and stomach aches are pretty common, or they're feeling nauseous, or they throw up often, or eating again is an issue. It has become an issue. If it's always been a thing, then that's one thing. But if it's something new, or they're bedwetting, or they're not sleeping properly through the night, or they stopped bedwetting and they started bedwetting, kind of a thing, or they had achieved certain milestones, but they seem to be regressing a little bit on them, or they're very clingy, or very, crying a lot, whining a lot. For teenagers, it can be more of just withdrawal. They're not engaging that much, or they're spending too much time. I mean, so withdrawal can take many shapes or forms. And of course, the easiest is to just withdraw into now devices, right? So, which is, of course, another area which has become a huge area of concern now with device overviews because of online schooling and everything, and kids being stuck at home.
All these things that you've talked about, the amplified thoughts, the OCDs, aches and pains in kids, everyone has them perhaps sometime in their life. In the context of the pandemic, what is worrisome? How long does it continue for to make somebody sit up and say, yes, I have a problem?
For a diagnosis, there'll be a certain time frame, but you don't have to wait for that. It's a few days. For example, there's something specific going on, and you can pin it to something specific, like if there's been a loss, or there's issues at work, or issues in a relationship. So there's something specific that's happened, and it's a response to that, and it's lasted for a few days. That's okay. But if it's gone on like for a month, now it's going to be 2 months, then of course it's too long. If these intrusive thoughts are like once in a blue moon, all of us have them. Once in a blue moon, it's okay. Once in a few months, it's okay. But if it's like once a week or or more than that, uh, more than a specific cutoff time frame. It's more of, is it causing distress? Is it making you feel uncomfortable? Is it getting in the way of relationships, of work, of enjoying things, of hobbies, of just being,
Mhm.
right? If it's getting in the way of any of those things, then it's time to seek help.
The important part, how do we break this anxiety cycle? So for someone who's already suffering from deep anxiety, give us concrete doable steps.
So the anxiety cycle really, it consists of both what happens physically, physiologically in the body, and then in terms of the thoughts, the worrying thoughts, and the way the thoughts escalate and become more and more negative, or how we play out the worst case scenarios all the time in our heads. In terms of that, there are two or three different things that one can do. One is more in the immediate moment, in the moment when you start to feel anxious, whether it's a real actual situation that you're dealing with, or it's just something that you're anticipating, whatever may be the trigger. And sometimes these triggers are not even very conscious. They're not in our conscious awareness. It may be that out of the blue, you're just feeling anxious. You don't know why, right? There's nothing that's specifically happened. You're just feeling anxious. So no matter what the trigger, when you feel that, and the first thing to pay attention to, and which is kind of easier to pay attention to, is the body, right? What do you feel in your body? So the moment you start feeling that pit in your stomach, or that little bit of heaviness in your chest, or muscles tensing up a little bit, or posture changes a little bit, if you can identify the moment any of these physical kind of symptoms start, at that point in time, breathing helps. So the thing to do in the moment is to breathe deeply. So that's a slow deep breath in and slow deep breath out. It's often called belly breathing. You can even do a YouTube search. You'll find many ways to do it. You can put your hand on your tummy and you can feel it inflate and deflate. So one is that. So just consciously doing deep breathing. And along with that, the other thing that one needs to do is, stop the mind going into this negative spiral of thoughts. At any point in time, the brain can only think, any one thought. So either you can have positive thoughts or you can have negative thoughts. So to just have a couple of short positive statements that you can say to yourself, whether it's okay, calm down, everything will be fine. And you can do this anywhere, anytime, for however long you need to, until that feeling goes away, until you feel that the feeling of anxiety has subsided. And then you can move on from there, because sometimes it's just that moment.
Mhm.
It can either escalate and turn into this whole negative thing that you're playing out in your head and feeling more and more anxious about, or it can even kind of escalate and then turn into a panic attack where you're palpitating and sweating and all of that, sweaty palms and all of that. Sometimes it also helps to take one's mind off whatever is the thing. So do something else, do something positive, constructive, listen to some music, put on some nice music, or just step out of the room, or just get a change of place, or call a friend, or just in some ways shift your mind from whatever it is. Because sometimes all you need is that little space, that little time to get perspective on the situation. Another thing to do, again, to gain perspective is use time. So if one is worrying about something, then you can always think about, okay, 2 years from now or 5 years from now, will it be a big thing to worry about? Will it still be an important issue? And if it's not going to be, then you don't need to really suffer so much right now. You don't have to worry so much right now, right? The other thing is, sometimes to think through, because what happens is, sometimes we'll also have, especially if there's a particular situation you're trying to deal with, it's causing anxiety, you don't know what to do, you're feeling stuck, then sometimes it helps to again get perspective by saying, okay, fine, if I was not here in this situation, if it was my best friend who was going through this situation right now, what would I tell my friend? We're always a lot more logical about things when we're giving advice to somebody else. So it's kind of playing that trick, playing a game with yourself and saying, okay, fine, what would be the advice? Because then you know what you would do, how you need to handle. And then, of course, sometimes it's just about, thinking of the worst case and coming up with a plan B.
Human beings, like you said, are resilient, and these are unprecedented times. So, Doc, there's no doubt that there is fear of the unknown. We don't know how long the pandemic will go on, or whether we'll be forced to live like this for years to come. Who knows? So, what can we do moving forward in the long term?
So the thing is, I mean, we've never known what will happen in the future, and we don't know, and we will never know what will happen in the future, right? And that's always going to be our situation as human beings. Mindfulness is one of those things, because the whole idea is to bring yourself back to the present, to ground yourself in the present, right? And the present may have its nice aspects to it, may have some not nice aspects to it as well. But whatever it is, whether it's the nice or it's the not nice, which you need to figure out how to change. If you can change, if you can't change, then accept. So sometimes it's just about learning ways to keep oneself in the present moment. Mindfulness is one of those ways. Meditation is one of the techniques that you can use. And meditation has actually been found, there's research that's been done and continues to be done on how things like meditation really help with anxiety. So it's like, to kind of live a healthy life, there are certain things that you have to make, which are lifestyle decisions, right? Or choices, like eating healthy, monitoring your screen time. Similarly, it is with, your mind, and mindfulness is one of those tools that one can use to keep one's mind healthy. Especially now, given the current situation, I think it becomes even more, more relevant and doable. It's really difficult to keep our minds in the present moment. It tends to veer into the future. That's where our planning and all of that happens. We learn to delay gratification, we plan, we do all of that. So those are the positive aspects of having the human mind. But the negative aspect is that, yes, we can also start then imagining a lot of negative stuff. So just watching out for that and keeping consciously trying to keep a more positive frame of mind. Because the thing is that, see, I mean, and none of us are born with any thoughts, right? Maybe they're not born with thoughts about things. Thoughts are acquired as we go along, right? The ways we think as habits that we have developed along the way. And if there are thinking habits that are not helping, they're just making you miserable, then you might as well change it and try and shift it consciously. And it's a matter of practice sometimes, like learning a new language. It can be done, but it's a matter of doing it consciously and doing it over a period of time till one gets to that place.
You can't change the pandemic. You can't change your environment right now. The only thing that you have control over is how you are feeling and what you will continue to feel in future. I think that's a very, very important point. I have some questions that have come in. Very interesting. So I think you've answered this already, but in case you want to add to it, coping with anxiety of being back face to face, have I lost that ability?
See, I think as human beings, we're incredibly, incredibly flexible and we adapt. So like we adapted to being stuck in the house, we will come back to that whole point. We're social animals. We can't stay without other human beings. So it may feel a little strange initially, or there are fears, but at least I don't expect that it'll last very long. I think going back to how we were in terms of social interactions, I think we'll be able to do that.
Does out of sight translate to out of mind in the workplace? But I read that and I thought, isn't everyone out of sight? Everyone is in their own home. So again, like you mentioned, I think it's our thinking that we started thinking like this, right? We think that people are thinking about what we are up to.
Like you said, sometimes it's just that we tend to overthink, or we tend to take things very personally. Most of the times, we're all stuck in our own, we have our own stuff going on, right? So a lot of the times we have apprehensions about what somebody else might be thinking about us, or if you're not there, people assume X about us or Y about us or whatever it is. A lot of the times that may not be the case. People are just busy doing their own things. They don't really have that much time to think about, sit and analyze other people, other than people like me, perhaps. But the thing is, no, I wouldn't analyze anybody like that. But the thing is, if this is actually a worry that you have, and if you're spending mind space thinking about it, then it's worthwhile finding out if this worry is even real. So if this is what you're worried about, then maybe, call your colleagues or call your boss or whoever it is, whoever the relevant person is, and ask them, are you uncomfortable with me not being in the office space? Do you have any concerns about that? And the person might turn around and say, no, we don't have any concerns. Or if they do have any concerns, maybe they'll tell you what their concerns are. And then there's a space to discuss it and figure out what can be done, rather than sit in and worry about something which actually you may not even know whether it's a thing to worry about yet.
I think financial anxiety is something that's constantly coming up. Companies restructuring because of budget cuts. I think the entire workspace is going to change. How we did business earlier is going to change. How do you cope with that anxiety? It's a real worry. Financial anxiety is a real thing.
Whatever it is, whatever you're anticipating, whether it's budget cuts or in terms of your salary or losing your job or anything like that, if these are real practical concerns, then of course, it's important to sit down and say, okay, what can you actually do about it, right? Can you apply to other things? Can you start trying to upskill yourself? Can you look at other sectors? Again, it's that 50-50 thing. We're anticipating a lot of things and maybe they will happen. What we tend to think is that, whatever will happen, whatever the outcome of these things, it'll be negative. But it's possible that there may be positive changes that come out of it. Maybe there'll be opportunities that come out of it that we don't know about yet. And that is actually something that's happening all the time, that there are opportunities happening, there are new things happening, new jobs getting created or new ways of working. Rather than worrying about this kind of an outcome, it's about, one is, of course, you might have to look at your finances and take a hard look at that and see what can you budget better, or how can you, what are the expenses that you can take out of the list, and so on and so forth. So those are practical things, right, that one can do. But the other is then also start thinking of other opportunities or other ways in which, other interests that you may have. So there are various ways to solve these problems. If it is a problem, then it probably has a solution. So then it's about thinking about, what the possible solutions could be. And if you think of multiple solutions, and something or the other will work out. That's how usually it is.
Yeah, and getting back to meditation and of course mindfulness. Mindfulness, as all of us know, is about being fully attentive and present in the present moment, to become also aware of the deep connection between our emotions, behavior, and thoughts. I mean, Dr. Vandita Dubey has talked about this a lot, and how by changing our thoughts, which is usually coming off as negative in terms of anxiety, we can actually change our emotions and behavior, right, Doc? Yeah.
And they're both, and they're two things, right? It's changing thoughts and also changing behavior. So you also have to do something about it, right? So just sitting and thinking about it won't change things, right? It's also about applying it. So like we said, it's also, when you're saying, okay, fine, if I think through and say, okay, fine, if I wear my mask and everything, maybe I can deal with the threat of the virus out there, right? But then just staying at home won't break that habit, or won't break that or change anything. You do have to step out of the house. You do have to venture out a little bit, or you do have to pick up the phone and call somebody, right? So it's both. It's both things go hand in hand. Like you said, it's very important to look at one's thought process and look at where one is falling into a negative trap and try and turn it around, but also put that into action to actually do something about it.
I'm going to end with this. What is the advice that you have for caregivers out there? Because there are a lot of us tending to our elderly parents or grandparents, or even other family members, some kids even. So what is your advice?
I think it's always challenging to be in a place of a caregiver. As a caregiver, you have to balance caregiving with taking care of your own self. And what happens is that often as caregivers, we tend to go to the extreme of just getting into that caregiver role while, not paying much attention to our own state of physical and mental health. So it's very important to, pause at some point, and especially if you're feeling drained, if you're feeling stuck, if you're feeling resentful, if you're feeling anxious, whatever it is, if you're not feeling great, then what that tells you is that maybe you're not taking care of your own self. You need to step back a little bit, and you need to create some space for your own self, right? The thing is that with caregiving, that it's very difficult to sometimes figure out what it is that you can perhaps kind of outsource, or what is it perhaps that you absolutely need to do, versus what is it that maybe you can step back a little bit from, so just try to figure out for your own self, depending on what your particular situation is, where are those spaces where maybe you really don't need to do so much, and you can take that time out for yourself and space out for yourself to take care of your own self, and to do it without guilt. Taking time out for yourself to take care of your physical and mental health is not a bad thing. It's not you being selfish. It's if you don't take care of yourself, then you will not be in a position to take care of somebody else long term, right? I mean, for a little while, yes, you can burn the candle on both ends, but you can't do it for an extended period of time.
I think that's a lesson that is challenging, that I myself am coping with. But yeah, you're right. You have to set boundaries for yourself, because at some point, I think all of us will become or have become caregivers. So that's an important point. Any last thoughts, Doc, before we wind up?
I think in terms of the pandemic, it's just a challenging situation, and continues to be. And I think it's now, as everybody's realizing, that it's maybe something that we have to learn to live with. And so we have to probably learn to live with the worry and fear and concern that comes along with it. But we have to watch out for the fear so that it doesn't become overblown. We don't overthink things, and then stay safe, of course, do things to stay safe, not give up completely. So, of course, do those things, but at the same time, to not get completely boxed in, or not completely paralyzed by the fear.
And reach out to other people. They may be going through the same, or they may be willing to, address some of the fears that come along. And of course, there are professionals like yourself to address much more complicated and complex issues. So on that note, thank you very much, Doc. I think this is an ongoing discussion, but I'm glad we've covered at least the basics of it, because it's been going on. These are questions that we've been getting on Zen-Brain for a while now, and it was high time that we addressed it. So thank you for that.
Thank you.